Most people think that lending money to the poor is, this incredibly warm, life-saving lifeline.
Oh, absolutely. It's been sold to us basically as the ultimate feel-good story of modern economics.
Right, like you give someone a tiny loan, they buy a sewing machine or maybe some extra inventory for their shop, they build a business, and bam, they pull themselves out of poverty.
Yeah, that's the narrative we all know.
Yeah.
But the truth is actually much darker.
It really is. The reality is that unrestricted credit expansion is actively stripping away their ability to protect themselves. It's not a cure. It's essentially a slow-acting poison.
And that's a really harsh reality for a lot of people to confront, mostly because that alternative narrative is just so deeply ingrained in how we view global poverty alleviation.
I mean, we're conditioned to believe that a lack of capital is the only problem these communities face, right? So obviously injecting debt must be the magic bullet.
Exactly. But it's just not true.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We have a really fascinating, completely counterintuitive, and frankly, worldview-altering mission today.
We really do. We are going to completely deconstruct the myth of deified microcredit.
Because for decades, microcredit, giving these small, highly structured loans to poor entrepreneurs, it was put on a pedestal.
It was universally praised. I mean, it won Nobel Prizes. Billions of dollars flowed into these institutions globally.
But when you actually look at the systemic outcomes for the global bottom, it didn't eradicate poverty for the masses. In a lot of cases, it actually triggered these suffocating localized debt crises.
Yeah, and today we're looking at a landmark study that finally explains exactly why this happens.
Yeah.
And more importantly, it reveals a shockingly simple solution that researchers uncovered.
And the funny thing is, the solution wasn't giving the poor more money to invest. It was basically giving them a place to hide the pennies they already had.
Which fundamentally challenges the whole assumption that vulnerable populations just need more access to credit.
So to figure this out, we're looking at this massive, incredibly rigorous field experiment conducted down in the slums and urban neighborhoods of Santiago, Chile.
Right. This was spearheaded by researchers Felipe Kast from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile and Dina Pomeranz from Harvard University.
Two world-class scholars who basically stepped out of the ivory tower and into the real world.
Exactly. They spent years following over 3,500 low-income micro-entrepreneurs.
Now, before we get into the exact mechanics of what they found, I kind of want to clarify the methodology here, just because the phrase field experiment can sometimes sound a bit abstract.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like they didn't just walk around with clipboards asking people how they felt about their finances, did they?
No, not at all. They conducted what's known as a randomized controlled trial, or an RCT.
Okay, so like what they do in medical research.
Exactly like that. In the medical world, if you want to know if a new heart medication works, you don't just hand it out and ask people if they feel better.
Right, you need hard data.
Yeah, you take a large group, you randomly assign half to get the real pill and half to get a placebo, and then you track the biological data over time. That completely eliminates selection bias.
And so Kast and Pomeranz did the exact same thing, but for financial behavior.
Yes. They isolated a treatment group and a control group among these 3,500 micro-entrepreneurs to see the pure, unvarnished causal effect of one specific financial intervention.
And the subjects of this study, I mean, they were people trying to hustle and survive in a very specific kind of volatile economic landscape.
Santiago is really fascinating context for this. Because Chile is an OECD country, it has significant economic development, but it also has these really stark wealth disparities.
Right. So the people in this study, they're running small businesses from their homes or out on the streets. They're selling cosmetics, operating tiny food carts, working as day laborers.
Which is vital to remember. These are active participants in the economy.
Yeah.
They're generating revenue every day.
But the fundamental danger of their financial lives, and really the fatal flaw of the microloans they rely on, isn't necessarily what you'd think. It's not just sky-high interest rates or predatory loan sharks.
I mean, those definitely exist, but the true danger actually hides in the system's highly regulated, entirely rigid repayment mechanism.
Yeah, the rigidity is the killer. To set the tone for this, let's think about traditional microloans like a high-speed treadmill at the gym.
That's a great analogy.
Like, it's a fantastic tool if you want to get somewhere. It forces you to keep moving. It builds momentum. And if you can maintain the pace, you're golden. You get stronger.
But what happens if you suddenly sprain your ankle? Or you just get a really terrible cramp?
The machine doesn't care. It doesn't stop.
No, it just keeps rotating at 10 miles an hour.
Exactly. And because you are injured and you can't keep up, it violently throws you against the wall behind you.
And in this context, that ankle sprain represents a sudden economic shock.
Right. A sickness in the family, a broken piece of equipment, a week of bad weather where nobody buys your street food.
That is exactly what a rigid loan does to a vulnerable person when life inevitably happens. It collides with random reality.
And to understand why that collision is so devastating, we have to look at the baseline reality of the global bottom before the researchers even introduced any intervention.
Yeah, Kast and Pomeranz meticulously mapped out the financial lives of these participants. And the numbers are just staggering.
Let's get into the numbers.
Okay, so on average, the short-term debt of these families was 166,000 Chilean pesos.
Let's anchor that number for you listening. What does 166,000 pesos actually mean relative to their earning power?
It was more than twice their average monthly household income per capita.
Okay, so before the month even begins, they are underwater. Twice over.
Yes.
And what did their safety net look like? Like, what was their median bank savings?
Zero. Exactly 0 pesos.
Yeah.
In fact, a full 68% of the participants in this study did not even possess a savings account of any kind before the experiment began.
So they were operating entirely without a financial floor. Nothing.
Nothing at all.
I have to pause here because this presents a logical paradox that I think anyone looking at this from the outside would immediately flag.
Go.
If a community is drowning in debt, literally owing twice their monthly income, and their savings are exactly zero, why would any economist think that offering them a savings account would do anything?
It's a very fair question.
I mean, doesn't that feel like giving a starving person a brand new empty wallet? If I don't have any money, the sheer existence of a bank account doesn't magically generate cash for me.
It's a very rational skepticism, and honestly, it was the central mystery the researchers were testing.
Because conventional economic theory usually assumes exactly what I just said, right?
Absolutely. The traditional assumption is that these populations have zero savings purely because they lack the ability to generate any surplus whatsoever.
Right. The thought is they spend 100% of their income on immediate survival.
Therefore, a savings account is useless. Therefore, they need more capital injections, more loans.
Which just feeds right back into the microcredit complex, They can't save, so we must lend to them.
Precisely. But Kast and Pomeranz hypothesized a completely different mechanism at play.
What if these micro-entrepreneurs do actually generate tiny amounts of surplus, like just pennies here and there from a really good day of sales? But the barriers to storing those pennies are simply too high.
Exactly. The structural and psychological barriers.
Let's examine those barriers. Because if you or I want to save money, we take the infrastructure entirely for granted.
Completely.
The app is just on our phone. The funds transfer instantly. There's basically zero friction. But for the unbanked in a sprawling urban environment, the friction is massive.
It's not just massive, it's actively hostile. So to test this, the researchers designed an experimental weapon, really.
A weapon against friction.
Yes. They partnered with Banco Credicil, which is a large financial institution there, to create a genuinely frictionless account. And they offered it to a randomly selected treatment group within the study.
Okay, so what defines frictionless in this specific economic context? Because banks always have fees.
Right. So they systematically stripped away the barriers that normally penalize poverty.
Yeah.
First, the financial friction.
The fee.
Yeah. Most formal bank accounts available to low-income populations come with monthly maintenance fees.
Right.
If your balance is tiny, a maintenance fee will literally eat your savings until you go into the negative. It acts as a literal tax on being poor.
That's infuriating.
It is. So, this experimental account waived all maintenance fees entirely. It also eliminated any minimum balance requirements.
So no penalties for being broke.
None. To open it, a participant only needed an initial deposit of 1,000 pesos, which at the time was roughly equivalent to about $2.
Wow. Okay, so the financial penalty is completely gone. $2 gets you in the door.
But there's another layer to this, which is arguably even more powerful.
The environment of the bank itself, the psychological friction.
A massive layer. In the baseline survey conducted before the experiment even started, 46% of the participants explicitly admitted they avoided entering formal banks because they felt intimidated.
I can so easily visualize that. Think about it. You are working in a bustling, dusty street market all day. You're wearing your work clothes.
So you're exhausted.
Yeah, and the bank is located in some wealthier commercial district. It has pristine marble floors, intense air conditioning, heavy glass doors, and armed security guards silently assessing every single person who walks in.
The implicit messaging of that architecture is deafening.
It essentially screams, "You do not belong here unless you have wealth."
And the psychological toll of crossing that threshold when you're poor is immense. So the researchers neutralized that barrier too.
How did they do that? You can't just change the bank's marble floors.
They didn't just mail out pamphlets and say good luck. They actively organized group trips. They provided personal assistance with the paperwork.
Hand-holding.
Exactly. They walked them through the exact documentation needed. They essentially held the heavy glass door open and entirely removed the intimidation factor.
So they created a perfect, free, deeply supported financial tool. They basically handed them a flawless shield against financial ruin.
They did.
So my immediate assumption would be that people desperate for a safety net would just jump at this, like 100% take-up rate.
You would think so.
When you completely remove the financial and psychological barriers to entering a bank, what percentage of these micro-entrepreneurs actually wanted to save?
The data reveals a very chilling reality. Only 53% of the treatment group even chose to open the account.
And only about half.
And of that group, only 39% actually became active users, meaning they deposited more than that initial $2 opening minimum over the entire course of the study.
Let me make sure I'm doing the math right here. That means 61% of the people who are handed a free, frictionless, structurally perfect financial shield effectively rejected it or just let it gather dust immediately.
That's correct. A massive 61% turned it down.
Okay, this is where the conventional logic just completely breaks down for me. If I am drowning in a sea of volatile debt and someone offers me a completely free life raft, why on earth would I refuse to get in?
This brings us to perhaps the most profound and definitely the most complex discovery of the entire deep dive.
Lay it on me.
The invisible force stopping them wasn't just a lack of spare change, and it wasn't a lack of financial literacy, which is what arrogant policymakers usually assume.
Right, they always blame it on education.
Exactly.
Okay.
But it was actually a deeply entrenched, highly rational response to their immediate family and social dynamics.
Wait, really?
Yes. In behavioral economics, this is documented as other control problems.
Other control problems. Okay, that sounds a bit clinical and academic. Let's translate that into the gritty reality of daily life in these neighborhoods.
Think of it as a localized, informal taxation system enforced by your own social network. We can just call it the social tax.
The social tax, I like that.
In a highly impoverished community, a slum or an informal settlement, privacy is essentially non-existent.
Everyone knows everyone's business.
Exactly. Your neighbors, your extended family, your friends, they all know what you do for a living. And more importantly, they generally know when you've had a good day.
Like, if you run a street food cart and the weather was fantastic and you sold out of all your empanadas, your network knows you have cash in your pocket that evening.
And because everyone in that network is also living right on the edge, constantly facing their own random economic shocks, your cash instantly becomes a target.
Man, that's heavy.
The social safety net in these environments is just the people around you. If your cousin's child needs medicine or your brother's work tools are stolen, they will come to you and ask for a loan because they are desperate.
And if you have the cash physically residing in your house, like hidden in a jar or stuffed under a mattress, you cannot simply look them in the eye and say no.
You can't. The social pressure, the moral obligation to your kin is overwhelming.
So the concept of other control means you essentially lack agency over your own assets because the demands of the network constantly override your individual financial boundaries.
That's the core of it. If you manage to accumulate a tiny surplus, it is immediately absorbed by the collective emergencies of the group.
This completely reframes what we think of as the obstacle to wealth accumulation. We always assume the barriers are external, like high prices at the grocery store or exorbitant interest rates from a bank.
But this suggests the most immediate drain on a micro-entrepreneur's surplus is actually the people closest to them, the deep-seated black hand of family obligation.
It is a profound tragedy of poverty. It's just mutual desperation. Any buffer you try to build is instantly consumed by the fires burning in the lives of your relatives.
So if we look at that 61% rejection rate through this lens, it suddenly makes total sense.
It really does. To actively save money in a bank, you have to be willing to look your desperate cousin or your hungry nephew in the eye and say, I am refusing to give you this money because I am locking it away for my own future.
Which carries a brutal emotional and social cost. Many participants probably felt that opening the account would signal to the community that they were hoarding wealth.
Or they just knew that the money would be demanded of them before they could even make the trip down to the bank branch to deposit it.
It's a highly rational defense mechanism to just avoid the friction entirely by not saving. But to truly prove this social tax theory, Kast and Pomeranz looked really closely at the 39% who actually did actively use the account.
I am very curious about the motivations of that 39%. Because let's be real, the motivation to open this account is not to earn compound interest.
No, definitely not.
This interest on a $30 balance is literally negligible.
The data shows their motivation was entirely deeply protective. The researchers analyzed the baseline surveys to see the specific characteristics of the people who took up the accounts.
And what did they find?
They found a fascinating correlation. Participants who previously reported that they frequently lent money out to others, but rarely or never borrowed money themselves, meaning the people who were the net creditors of their social circle.
The ones being the most heavily taxed by their network.
Exactly. That specific group saw a 17% relative spike in taking up the account compared to the average.
Oh, wow. So the people who were constantly bleeding cash to their relatives were the ones who jumped at the chance to get this account.
They were actively looking for a hiding place.
They needed a sanctuary.
They absolutely did. And the researchers tracked what happened next. There was a specific subgroup in the baseline survey who explicitly stated they regretted not saving more.
Okay.
When these specific individuals gained access to the frictionless account, they didn't just start accumulating balances quietly. They actively used the existence of the account to drastically cut down the money they lent out to their social network.
How much did they cut it by?
Over the course of the study, this group reduced their informal lending to friends and family by nearly 12,000 pesos.
Wait, so they used the bank account as a structural shield. It essentially allowed them to legally lie.
Yes.
They could look their relative in the eye and say, I would love to help you, man, but I don't have the cash. The bank has it, and I can't get it right now.
It creates an institutional barrier that takes the personal rejection out of the equation. It shifts the blame entirely to the bank.
I want to push back on this a little bit, or rather, I want to explore the ethical implications of this.
Sure.
Because I can imagine a listener hearing this and thinking, wait, is this study saying that giving poor people bank accounts just makes them selfish? Are these people just abandoning their loved ones the second they get a taste of financial independence?
It's a very important question. But to answer it, we really have to dismantle the romanticized view of informal family borrowing.
Right.
We often picture it as this warm, communal system of mutual aid, like a village coming together to raise a barn.
Yeah, everybody chipping in.
But in the context of deep urban poverty, that is rarely the reality. It's not a quaint harmonious safety net.
So what is it?
It operates as a hidden, implicit contract built on the exploitation of dignity. It comes with incredibly high psychological costs, heavy social pressure, and a persistent dynamic of guilt and obligation.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. When a relative demands a loan in this environment, they aren't just taking your excess luxury cash. They are consuming the vital buffer you desperately need to survive your own inevitable economic shock.
It's basically a cycle of mutual harm disguised as mutual aid.
Precisely. Which means that by hiding their money in the formal banking system, they aren't becoming cold and selfish. They are reclaiming their agency.
Reclaiming agency. That is the crucial takeaway. The formal bank account serves as a secret, highly effective tool for the poor to decently and quietly sever this toxic chain of mutual extraction.
They are rescuing themselves from bottomless social extortion. They're finally claiming the right to build a personal firewall against the chaos of their environment.
That reframing is incredibly powerful. It's literally putting your own oxygen mask on first so you don't both suffocate.
Exactly.
And speaking of that firewall, we need to dive into the actual math of what this protection achieved. Because this is the part of the data that genuinely reads like a mathematical impossibility. It's a total slap in the face to normal logic.
It really is. Let's look at the actual balances they achieved. The numbers are astonishing, especially when you consider the scale we established earlier.
Right. Remember, the average baseline short-term debt was 166,000 pesos.
Yes. And after a year of the experiment, the active users of these frictionless accounts had managed to save an average balance of about 18,500 Chilean pesos.
Okay, 18,500 pesos. If we convert that to US dollars for context, that is roughly $37.
Correct, $37.
And relative to their own earning power, that 18,500 pesos represented only about 23% of their average monthly income.
So we're talking about a tiny, pitifully small buffer, less than a quarter of 1 month's income.
You would logically assume that $37 wouldn't even make a statistical dent in a debt profile of 166,000 pesos. Like, it's not even enough to buy a decent winter coat. It's a drop in the ocean.
That is what linear logic would suggest. But behavioral economics is rarely linear.
So what happened?
Having this tiny $37 account caused their overall short-term debt to plummet by 20%. Yes, that represents an average drop of 12,931 pesos in outstanding debt.
Let me wrap my head around this. Saving an average of 18,500 pesos effectively erased almost 13,000 pesos in debt.
It's a dimensional strike against their debt load. The amount of debt reduced was a massive multiple of the pitiful amount they actually managed to save.
But more importantly, it broke the need for the debt cycle. Where did this debt reduction actually happen? Like, who are they no longer borrowing from?
The most massive, statistically significant drop occurred in borrowing from family and friends.
The social tax network.
Exactly. That specific category of informal debt collapsed by an incredible 38%. And drilling down even further, the sharpest decline was in borrowing from their own parents.
This is a mathematical paradox that really requires some deep explanation. Because how does a $37 asset prevent hundreds of dollars of subsequent debt?
Right.
If I save $37, my net worth increases by $37. It doesn't magically pay off $100 of debt somewhere else.
It comes down to understanding the mechanics of self-insurance and how savings and high-interest informal debt act as direct substitutes for one another.
Okay, explain that.
When you have absolutely zero savings, your vulnerability to any shock is absolute. If a $20 emergency hits, say your child gets an ear infection and needs antibiotics, you must borrow that $20.
Because you literally have no other mechanism to acquire the medicine. You can't just not treat your kid.
Exactly. But because you are borrowing from a loan shark or from a deeply stressed family member, that $20 loan doesn't just cost $20.
It comes with massive friction.
Massive. It comes with high interest rates, compounding late fees, social obligations, favors owed, and deep psychological guilt.
So that initial $20 shock quickly balloons into a $50 or $80 problem over the coming weeks as you struggle to pay it back while maintaining your normal daily expenses.
I see the mechanism now. When the cost of saving drops to zero because the experimental account is free and frictionless, the demand for that toxic short-term credit just collapses.
Exactly. If you have a $37 buffer securely in the bank and that same $20 emergency hits, you do not visit the loan shark.
Right.
You do not knock on your parents' door and beg for cash, stripping away your own dignity. You just walk to an ATM and you withdraw your own money.
The tiny buffer prevents the initiation of the toxic debt cycle. It stops the snowball before it even begins to roll down the hill.
You are neutralizing the shock at the exact point of impact, rather than letting it infect your entire financial ecosystem.
What I find so compelling about this is the extreme rationality of the participants.
Oh, absolutely.
They didn't just stumble into this outcome. The data proves they knew exactly what they were doing with this money.
Because the researchers looked at different categories of debt, right?
Yes. While their short-term emergency debt plummeted by that 20%, their long-term commercial loans, like the formal microfinance loans they use for business inventory or their formal mortgages, didn't change at all.
Wow. The variance was statistically zero?
Zero. Which means they didn't look at this 18,500 pesos and think, oh, I'll use this as fungible capital to pay down my business loan slightly faster to save on long-term interest.
No, they engaged in very strict mental accounting. They precision engineered this tiny savings account to act purely as an emergency airbag.
They understood perfectly that their long-term business debt was structured. It was manageable as long as their baseline revenue held up.
It was the short-term, unexpected, random shocks that had the power to completely ruin them. So they deployed the new savings exclusively to fight the short-term fires.
It perfectly highlights the contrast between two different realities of poverty.
Think about the messy reality of owing your neighbor $100. Every time you see them in the street, there is that unspoken tension.
You owe them a favor.
If they ask you to watch their kids for the day, which keeps you from your own work, you have to say yes. There is guilt, there is shame, it is a deeply entangled, messy existence.
Contrast that with the clean, autonomous reality of walking up to an ATM, entering a PAN, and withdrawing your own $37.
It is the restoration of basic human dignity.
And that restoration of dignity wasn't just a psychological comfort. It had profound physical implications for their daily survival.
Because this $37 didn't just clean up their balance sheets, it physically protected their bodies and their homes when the inevitable storms hit.
Let's talk about those storms. Because having a savings account didn't increase their sales. They weren't magically making more money selling cosmetics or street food.
Right.
But the data shows it protected their most basic dignity when an economic shock occurred.
How frequently were these families actually hit by a crisis during the study? I mean, how volatile is it really?
Over the course of just 1 year, a staggering 40% of the participants suffered what the researchers classified as a severe economic shock.
40% in 1 year.
Yes, we are talking about events like a primary breadwinner losing a job or a massive, sustained downturn in their micro-business revenue.
That alone proves how incredibly volatile this environment is. They're constantly walking on a tightrope in high winds.
So what happened to the families who had the $37 savings account when the wind knocked them off, versus the families who had nothing?
To measure this, Kast and Pomeranz tracked a specific, really grim metric: the forced need to ruthlessly cut daily survival consumption.
When a massive shock hits and you have absolutely no financial buffer, you cannot simply maintain your lifestyle on credit.
You are forced to stop buying things immediately.
You stop buying adequate food, you stop paying for essential services, you stop buying bus tickets.
Because, returning to our treadmill analogy, the microfinance institution still demands its weekly payment. The debt collection doesn't pause just because you lost your job.
No, it doesn't. So the money to pay the debt has to literally come out of your own stomach or your child's stomach.
That is just a grim reality. But the data showed that for the families who possessed the frictionless savings account, their likelihood of having to make those ruthless survival-level cuts dropped by an astonishing 44%.
A 44% reduction in extreme deprivation from $37.
That is a massive shielding effect.
What specific aspects of their daily lives were they actually able to protect with this buffer?
Well, the researchers broke it down by category, and they found significant protection of absolute essentials. For instance, utility debts, meaning the likelihood of falling behind on water, gas, electricity, and phone bills, dropped by 37%.
Falling behind on utilities isn't just a late fee arriving in the mail. In these neighborhoods, it means facing the survival humiliation of having your water literally shut off.
It means you can't clean your children for school, you can't cook safely. It means the power grid is disconnected, and your home goes dark and freezing cold at night.
It is an immediate degradation of the household's structural integrity. The savings prevented that degradation.
Furthermore, the forced cutbacks on eating meat significantly decreased. The nutritional value of the food on the table was maintained.
But there was one specific mobility metric that I think illustrates the physical toll of poverty better than anything else.
The transportation data. This was the statistic that hit me the hardest when I read the study. The forced need to walk instead of taking the bus plummeted.
Yes. For those with the active account, the probability of being forced to walk instead of taking public transit dropped by over 10%.
We really need to unpack what walking instead of taking the bus actually means in the systemic geography of a city like Santiago.
It's not just a nice walk.
No, this isn't a pleasant 20-minute stroll to get some exercise. The poorest neighborhoods, the informal settlements, are systematically pushed to the far peripheries of the city.
Right.
But the economic centers, the places where these micro-entrepreneurs actually sell their goods, or the affluent neighborhoods where they might find day labor, are located in the urban core.
It's a vast, sprawling urban landscape. The commute is significant.
Exactly. So giving up the bus fare to save a few coins doesn't mean a minor inconvenience. It means you are forced to walk 2 to 4 hours a day.
2 to 4 hours.
You are walking along highways and dirt roads. You are walking in the freezing wind of the Andean winter or the scorching sun of the South American summer.
And the physical exhaustion of that daily march drains the very energy and physical health you desperately need to actually work your business and improve your life.
It is a compounding physical tax.
So when we look at the utility of that $37, we aren't just looking at numbers on a ledger.
Every single penny saved in that tiny bank account physically transformed into calories on the dinner table.
It transformed into keeping the lights on and the water flowing.
It saved hours of barefoot exhaustion in the cold. It operated as a literal dignity defense fund.
It didn't lift them into the middle class, but it installed a hard concrete floor underneath them so they didn't plunge into absolute humiliating destitution when the random Tuesday shock hit.
I want to ask you, the listener, right now, to apply this concept to your own life. What is your equivalent of bus fare?
That's a great question.
When money gets incredibly tight, what is the very first thing you sacrifice? For many of us, it might be a streaming subscription or laying a vacation or eating out less.
But imagine if the very first thing you had to sacrifice to satisfy a debt payment was your physical warmth, your basic nutrition, or hours of your physical energy.
How would that constant threat alter your self-worth? How would it warp your mental health?
Which brings us to the final major finding of this deep dive. And it addresses exactly what you just asked. It exposes perhaps the most invisible, yet most crippling aspect of systemic poverty.
We call it the cognitive firewall.
Because poverty is not merely the mechanical state of having an empty wallet. Poverty is a screaming siren in your brain that never ever turns off.
And yet somehow, this tiny savings account managed to quiet the siren.
The psychological data extracted from this field experiment was just as rigorous as the financial data, and the results were staggering.
Kast and Pomeranz didn't just measure the movement of pesos, right?
No, they utilized standardized psychological surveys to measure anxiety and stress levels. They found that for the experimental group, the ones provided with the savings account, their anxiety regarding their financial future dropped by 0.112 standard deviations.
Okay, I know standard deviations are the absolute love language of economists and statisticians, but for a general audience, we need to translate what a 0.112 standard deviation drop actually feels like in a human brain.
That is a very fair point. They also measured a backward-looking metric, the participants' subjective feeling of recent economic hardship. That specific metric dropped by 0.087 standard deviations.
This sounds abstract.
To put these abstract statistical numbers into a visceral human perspective, the researchers compared these drops to the measured psychological impact of major traumatic life events.
And the comparison they found is wild.
The reduction in baseline anxiety they experienced simply from possessing this tiny, frictionless savings account was roughly equivalent to avoiding more than half of the psychological trauma associated with a family member getting fired from their job.
Let that sink in for a moment. In any household, regardless of income, a primary earner getting fired is one of the most existentially stressful things a family can endure.
It causes sleepless nights, marital conflict, and deep dread.
And just knowing that you have $37 sitting safely in a frictionless account erased half of that equivalent terror from their daily baseline existence.
It acts as a cognitive firewall. And it validates a very important concept in behavioral economics known as cognitive bandwidth depletion, largely pioneered by researchers like Senhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir.
What does that theory basically say?
The theory posits that the human brain only has so much processing power. Constant worry creates a poverty trap of its own.
When your brain is constantly running emergency simulations like, how will I pay for the water bill? What if the baby gets sick tomorrow? How will I avoid my neighbor who wants a loan? That scarcity mindset consumes all of your mental RAM.
You literally have no cognitive bandwidth left to make good, long-term strategic decisions.
You become cognitively paralyzed. You are forced to make desperate short-term survival decisions because you are absolutely terrified.
Exactly. You borrow from the loan shark at 50% interest because you need to survive today, and the concept of next month doesn't even exist in your mind yet because the siren is too loud.
But relieving that mental load, turning off that screaming alarm, frees up processing power.
It allows a micro-entrepreneur to actually engage in future planning.
Yeah.
It allows them to think strategically about next month's inventory rather than just tonight's dinner.
A tiny free bank account does not cure poverty. We are not claiming it does. But it absolutely cures the cognitive paralysis of constant financial terror. It buys you your brain back.
It buys back your agency, your dignity, and your mental clarity. And fundamentally, it proves that the poor are incredibly rational, capable actors.
The overarching narrative that they need to be taught financial literacy or taught how to value money through rigid loan schedules is just flawed.
They simply needed a safe, frictionless sanctuary to place their surplus away from the structural and social traps that surrounded them.
So what does this all mean for the bigger picture? As we synthesize the findings of this incredible deep dive, we have to look at the global pivot it demands.
The massive takeaway from this Santiago field experiment is that in a highly unpredictable, volatile modern world, we need to fundamentally rethink poverty alleviation.
We must stop aggressively selling debt to the most vulnerable people on Earth under the guise of salvation.
The empirical evidence is clear. The mechanisms of preventative savings and short-term credit are substitutes for self-insurance.
And the data shows the poor overwhelmingly prefer free, frictionless savings over expensive, stressful overdrafts and rigid loans to smooth out the jagged edges of life.
Pushing more microcredit, more loans, more rigid treadmills is not the answer for everyday survival. Instead of throwing them another loan application, we need to help them build a foundational, dignified savings firewall.
It is a profound shift in perspective, from aggressively pushing capital to providing sanctuary.
Financial sanctuary. It's about offering the tools of autonomy rather than the shackles of obligation.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought to mull over as you go about your day. Think about your own life and your own financial architecture.
You might not be a micro-entrepreneur selling goods in Santiago.
You might not be walking 4 hours along a highway just to save bus fare, but where are the hidden forces operating in your own ecosystem?
Where are you paying an invisible social tax?
Where are the implicit unspoken contracts in your personal or professional life that are silently draining your resources, whether those resources are emotional, temporal, or financial?
And crucially, where are you relying on rigid debt to solve random, unpredictable life problems?
We all navigate our own unique intersections of rigidity and randomness. Recognizing those collisions is the first step to mitigating them.
Maybe it is time to examine your own margins and build your own frictionless firewall.
Not merely to watch a number go up in a bank account, but to buy back your agency and ultimately your peace of mind. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.